All right. Thanks, folks, for joining today's LO Meetup. It's February 23rd, and it's 12 o'clock here on the East Coast, where I'm based out of. I'm going to go ahead and get started. Our panel today is all about recent job transitions. So let's start with introducing our panelists. Simone, if you can introduce yourself first.
Okay, hi, I'm Simone Blackburn. I'm based in the UK, in Europe, and it's 5 o'clock here. I'm a data scientist, and I started a new job at Leap. It's a startup with the ultimate mission to help decarbonize the electricity grid, kind of providing a software solution to create virtual power stations. And yeah, anyone who wants to know more, feel free to also send me a message on Slack. And I've joined Leap in September last year. So that was my first kind of remote only job, my first remote only job transition, first time interviewing remotely. So yeah, happy to talk about my experiences.
Thank you, Simone. And Tim, similar questions.
Hi, I'm Tim. I'm based out of Atlanta, Georgia. I'm a senior analytics engineer at Brooklyn Data Co. I started with them back in October. However, I've been on a fair amount of job hunting in the past couple of years for one reason or another. So this is like my third full-time role since like March 2020. And yeah, have plenty of red flags to bring up and other experiences and such due to my experiences.
And Zach.
Yeah, I'm Zach. I'm in Austin, Texas. I'm an analytics engineer at Ritual, which is a company that right now mostly sells vitamins and protein and wants to sell other stuff as well.
And how long have you been there?
I joined in October. And so that would be 5 months maybe now.
Nice. Well, thanks everyone for giving intros. Just a reminder to all the folks who are joining that the Slack channel that we'll be using for today's discussion is Meetup Job Transitions. Please try to use that instead of the chat. Lots of conversations will happen in parallel. If you've got a question though, I will try to surface it to our speakers. So thanks everyone for being here, and excited for our panelists to share some of their experiences. So let's start a little bit with the interviewing remotely process, What was it like? Maybe Simone, you can start and tell us a little bit. You said this was your first all remote interview process. What was that like? What are the things maybe you missed compared to previous interview processes?
It's a good question. Yeah, so definitely first time, but all interviews, even my face-to-face ones before, always started with like a half an hour intro call, where you just learn more about the role, and it's more, you talk about yourself a little bit and why you want to apply or why you applied for this particular job, and then it's like the next interview. So that was the same, but what I've missed is maybe getting more a sense of the personality of the other person. It's usually when you meet face to face, you have some sort of reaction, but then on the other hand, maybe it makes it fairer if you don't have that reaction and you don't really know much more about whoever's interviewing you. So I don't really feel like I missed that much, to be honest.
And when you went through the interview process, did it feel like it was longer, shorter, faster, slower? Any thoughts on how the timing felt being all remote versus maybe some in-person prior experiences?
It was slower, but I think that was because the company had a lot of different interviews. So I went through a lot of different stages. So I had like the intro call, and then I had a technical interview where I had to do some data science work. And then I had culture fit interviews, and 3 of them. So I've never had culture fit interviews before. This was completely new to me, a new concept of, for those who don't know what culture fit interviews are, it's basically where you talk to other employees in the company who are maybe not particularly in the same team, but also work, perhaps with you in the future, and they kind of check you out for, what's your attitude to work, what's your dream job, what the kind of team do you want to work in. So it's not technical at all. It's more about, what your expectations are. And then also you can ask questions about the company, which was really, interesting definitely experienced, but yeah, it dragged out the whole process a bit, because if you have, every culture fit interview has 2 employees and then they need to be available. So I felt like it was probably 3-4 weeks of interviews in the end, because it just stretched out so long.
Zach, what about you? How did you feel about the timing of your interview process, maybe compared with other interview processes, remote or in person?
Yeah, I feel like it is a lot slower than I feel like it used to be. And I think since interviewing remotely is the norm now, there are a lot more stages than I feel like there used to be. Because I think when I interviewed before, like locally, it would be like a screen, you talk to the hiring manager on the phone, and then generally you just go in for a couple of hours. It is a lot easier to interview remotely while having a job, because then you don't have to like, oh, I have a doctor's appointment today or anything. But I think interviewing remotely, I think recruiters feel a lot more important now than they used to, as far as like recruiters on their end, like scheduling you and managing you as someone in the pipeline. Because I feel like I just talk to them a lot more in general now, because since things are slower, I'm just curious, like, am I rejected? What's my state? And then there's just a lot more, I think, responsibility in that role now versus just like, hey, be here at 9 a.m. Now it's like, I need to coordinate a couple of calendars. You can't just pull someone in randomly.
Tim, you mentioned that you'd interviewed a couple of different places. How do you feel the timing's been, and what are some of the things you're learning to look for or ask for as you're going through the interview process?
Let's see. So in terms of the timing situation, like, I've grown to acknowledge that different companies have different tempos in which they approach recruiting. Some place, especially if the massive fire hose of people applying to jobs now and leaving their old jobs and finding new ones, the way that companies and the recruiting process have adjusted to it has been sporadic, and has been like there's a divergence in it, in which some places can hire at the speed of the fire hose, and then they have a system in place that routinely churns out interviews and have things go at a really rapid, quick pace with turnarounds like 1 to 2 days per stage. Other places have their processes dragged along due to having this massive fire hose, but not being able to scale and accommodate for interviewing all dozens and dozens of people to apply to an individual role. So I've been in situations where some companies can hire within, can move through to interview stages within 1 to 2 days. Other times I've waited 2 to 3 weeks in order to hear back from someone.
And how do you let that shape your impression of the company?
It's one variable in the whole impression of the company, that being like, how well can, it's 1 or 2 variables. How well can the company scale? And 2, how well, what is the company's perspective and culture towards recruiting? Like, do they treat it as a priority? Are they putting pressure on, or do they treat recruiting as something they want to prioritize and work on and be able to accommodate for this massive fire hose of people coming in and applying to their roles? Or are they treating it as kind of like a lagging indicator of, well, we should eventually scale up on this, or we're just going to take things as things go? But that's just one tiny little variable of the whole culture fit, of the whole culture perspective on the company. But I will say, there is, when you're interviewing, oftentimes for the first few days and first few stages, recruiting is the face of your perspective of the company. That's all the context, that's all the perspective you have on who the company is and what they are. So I think it's absolutely fair game to just treat that as your impression for the time being during those initial rounds.
Yeah, that's really, really useful. I have said for a long time that interviewing is a little bit like dating, where it's just as important that you find the right match for you in the role as it is that the company find the right match for them. So these next series of questions from the community seem to kind of align with that spirit. So Kelly asks, is there anything that a company did during the hiring process that really impressed you? And maybe Tim, do you want to take this one?
I could, yes. I will say, like, I will anonymize this, even though it's very easy to figure out. There is one company that I interviewed for that had just been phenomenal in the sense of their recruiting process and how they treat their candidates and respect them and the transparency and the communication across them. And they may or may not have done a coalesce panel about the recruiting process back in December. And their founder may or may not be on this call right now.
We won't hold it against you if you say any bad things against your boss, so you're fine. We all have job-free hats here.
I can, like, I think, yes, if you're interviewing, I would recommend looking through like Brooklyn Data Co's coalesce panel on their recruiting process and how they treat it. Because that, in my perspective, is like the gold standard of how candidates should be treated, candidates should be looked at in terms of like how a company can be impressing their candidates and creating that impression early on for the recruiting phase, and even as the interview process goes along and people meet like managers and ICs and the teams and do panel interviews and technical exercises.
Tim, is there something specific, maybe like one specific activity you'd point to?
Oh, yes, I actually, one specific, yes. One of it is, let's see. They were very accommodating with time and your own schedules. Like at every step of the way, despite how I know like Brooklyn Data Co is like scaling as fast as it is and growing, there was never any pressure from recruiting or from anyone I talked to about accepting an offer, moving on to the next stage, or getting a technical exercise done. It was always like, we respect your schedule. We know that you're a busy person. We know you're probably interviewing while you have a job right now. So send that technical exercise when you're done. And we recommend it only take this amount of hours, but feel free to take however many days you need in order to get it done. And then that applied to even the offer stage. Like once I got the offer, it was just, what are your hesitancies? But also we want you to have time to think through things and make a decision. And also, do you want to talk to someone from the team about what the actual day-to-day work is and figure out something after the offer is done? Now, so like, but really, like, there was a sense of urgency in which recruiting wanted to move themselves quickly and wanted to move the process quickly, but there wasn't pressure on me as a candidate on the timelines. So it was very accommodating for me. I'll say that much.
That's awesome. Zach, do you have anything that jumped out to you in the interview process?
Positive things or negative things?
Oh, both.
So yeah, I was gonna also, if I was asked this, I was also gonna say Brooklyn Data, but I wasn't gonna name them. That has a really good interview process. I don't work there though. But I think other good things I've seen are just, I think I've only done like one full culture panel, and I think they feel under indexed on in interviewing remotely because you're just kind of trying to get through to the end, and you're just evaluating people's skill sets. As far as negative things, I've had some pretty, I guess I've only, since July 2020, I've only applied to like 50-ish jobs, so it's not a ton of cycles. But I've had some stuff where it's like, I've had a couple of take homes that are due in 24 hours, which is like not the best. Some really long lag times between stages is also not good. And then, applying for one position, doing a take home for it, and then being asked to interview for another position in like the same flow is very confusing. And so these like really disorganized interview processes are like the ones that really stick out in my mind, which is just kind of like a combination of ghosting and, oh, I've also done like an incorrect whiteboard exercise where it was for a data scientist that was applying for like a BI engineer. Yeah, I still did. They gave me positive feedback though, so I felt good about that, but it was just a weird moment.
Yeah. Kelly asks, is there anything you wish a company would have done to make the remote interview more comfortable? Is there anything that you'd call out?
I had one recently where I think they had their child sick at home, and so they didn't turn on their camera, and so I didn't turn on mine either, and it was just kind of like, I'm a millennial, so I hate talking on the phone, but I'm very comfortable in video calls. But being on a video call with no camera is like, it was kind of freeing because there's a pressure to like look at the camera, whereas when you're not on camera, you can't just kind of like, I tend to like space out. There's like a window over here that I look out of. And so that was kind of one of the nicer things that happened recently, but yeah, I'm not sure.
I'm curious for all our participants in the Slack, if you could let us know, are you on team camera on or team camera off? I'm one of those people who's very uncomfortable on a Zoom call when everyone has their camera off and you show up and you have your camera on because you think that's the expectation. Because then it's like, oh, can I awkwardly turn it off or not? I'm not sure what the norms here are. So, but that's a good call out. Simone, maybe you can tell us a little bit, what questions do you find most useful in understanding whether a role is a good fit for you?
I have my kind of boxes I want to be ticked. So I guess if the company can tick them all, then that's amazing. So questions like, for me as a data scientist, I always ask about the data infrastructure, data availability, because I have had a lot of jobs where I just spent most of my time sorting out data instead of working with the data. So I feel like I need some reassurance there when I interview. And yeah, that's definitely something I wanted to say something, if that's okay, to the other question about what impressed me most, if that's okay, because I had a really, really positive experience about part-time working. So I've got 2 small children and it's really hard to find a part-time job, at least in the UK. So usually what happens is you get a full-time job, we work there for 6 months and then you can request part-time work. So this one, when I brought up, I work part-time, is this a problem? They said all our jobs are advertised, 80 to 100%. So whatever you want to do works for us. And that was, yeah, hugely impressive. And there's a lot of employees in my company who work part-time as well. And yeah, that was just amazing.
So did you have to ask them that? And if so, when did you ask?
I asked in the telephone interview first.
The very first.
I had, yeah, it was supposed to be in a job description, but it wasn't there. I don't know why, there must have been a mistake or something, but that's what I was told. Like, for them, it doesn't matter, anything between 80 and 100% is okay, and if you want to work a bit less, then we can talk about it.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
I'll open this up to the crowd, but if you've got questions you find most useful in understanding whether a role is a good fit for you, I'd love for you to share them in Slack. I know I've started in the past with, similar to what Simone said, what's important to me. For example, do I want to be part of a team? Do I care about opportunities for growth? Does career development look like? Is it a remote first org? Are they async or not? And kind of coming up with my criteria and then figuring out the right questions to suss things like that out. But I would love to hear what questions other people have. Alan asks, and I'll open this up to our panelists, how much creativity was encouraged during take-home projects? So maybe it would be useful if you could share a little bit about the variety and the kinds of take-home projects you saw, and then how much creativity was encouraged. It seems like someone is off mute, but oh, good. Panelists, tell us about your take-homes.
I'm just thinking about it, but yeah, I had different, so depending on different interviews, different kind of tasks, I had to do technical kind of things. And usually it's a programming exercise. Sometimes it's accompanied by a presentation. So I guess you can be as creative as you like with the presentation to kind of complement what you found out from the data. Yeah, and even with the code, writing it, commenting it, are you going to use a Jupyter notebook or are you going to write it in R and things like that? Maybe that's as much creativity as I had available. I hope that answers the question.
Tim, Zach, any experiences to add there?
I've had a handful of interviews, probably within like the data scientist, data analyst space that like, have allowed a lot of creativity, but personally, I have not enjoyed the ones that allow too much, in the sense that it leaves you with a lot of fuzziness and ambiguity about like, okay, what is this take-home project even asking for? What are the expectations for this? Because even though there is room for creativity, there is the nuance and difficulty of how do you convey and reconcile the creativity that you express in the project to what the expectations and the rubric, so to speak, of the person reviewing the take-home project. So like there is definitely room for creativity, and however, I feel like it also comes with the cost of like having to ask a bunch of questions about it and having to refine and figure out, okay, what do you actually want from this project? And it's not often a slippery slope, but I think like it's also a great indicator, like how can you hold a conversation that isn't traditionally added into the recruiting process, such as how do I get clarification from these take-home projects? Who can I ask about this? How quickly can, or how easily can recruiting identify who to talk to about the technical aspects about this?
I've seen in the past some organizations do shared Slack channels with candidates. Did any of you have that in your technical assessments? And if so, did you like it or did you find it intimidating?
I have at a couple of like remote only companies. And then I've had some where like you even do the interview, like you have a screen in a shared Slack channel. So there's no phone call, you're just kind of typing. And I think I enjoyed it because it does kind of create these like clear lines of communication, especially between when you're given a take home and you kind of have these like more big projects. Yeah.
I actually haven't heard about like shared Slack channels during the interview process. Do you mind like explaining a bit about that to me and like, whoever may have also not done that
Yeah.
before?
So in my last role, as an example, when we moved a candidate to a technical assessment, we always created a Slack channel that we could invite them to either as a single channel guest, or if they had a Slack group that they used, it would be a shared Slack channel. And they would essentially have a way to Slack us in with any questions. And we made clear that we were available. But that would the idea or the thinking behind it was that that's very similar to how you would ask for help if you were working on an actual work project. Though I haven't had the experience that Zach's talking about just like interviewing via Slack. So maybe Zach can speak to that a little bit more.
Yeah, it was for a company that is pretty global and is very remote first. And it was just kind of going through, and they're kind of asking questions about, it was a data scientist role, and asking kind of your basic screening options and screening questions, and really just it allowed you more time to think about what you're going to say, maybe overthink a little bit, but it was a pretty interesting experience. I think it was one of the few times we had to be like synchronized, but there's no pressure to be shoveled. You know, you can be, because I think the person I was working with was in Europe. So I woke up pretty early just to kind of get that sync time. And then after that, they gave me a take home and I could ask questions to them and they would get back to me kind of on in an async manner. And it was a pretty good experience of just understanding how a company that works through mostly writing and just getting an introduction to that culture.
And similar, so veering away from shared Slack channels a little bit, when we talk about take-home assessments, how often were you being given clear expectations? Like, please spend no more than 2 hours on this, or please spend, this limited amount of time, or here's what success looks like. Were you being given those expectations? Or did you feel like things were being thrown to the wall and see what sticks?
So I was given those expectations, and with my current role that worked fine, but for a previous interview for a role I didn't get in the end, the expectation was I'll spend no longer than 4 hours on it, and I spent like 2 full days, and then I lost faith because I was like, it's taking me that long, and if they can do this in 4 hours, it's taking me 2 hours. I just lost all my confidence in it, and it didn't go very well at all in the end, because I felt the expectation was maybe too high, or I wasn't suitable. I guess it could go both ways.
That is my personal gripe with companies who give take-home assignments and prescribe a number as to like the expected amount of time to spend on it, because it's such an arbitrary number to some extent, and it's so dependent on who defines it. Because they can define it as like, okay, this will take 72 hours, but like that is from their perspective, and that is based on their like scoping. It's kind of like if you're planning a sprint and like someone interjects and tells you this is how long it's going to take you, and it really strips the agency away from that. But like I think it needs to be properly conveyed when an estimate's given, that like the estimate is more like, hey, here is an average or reasonable amount of time to do it, and if you feel like you're taking more time, then maybe you should follow up with a discussion, or maybe we could talk about like if this is the right fit, or if there were any like fundamental confusions that you may have had.
Another way to manage it that I've seen is where companies will say like, hey, we're giving you this very large task. We don't expect you to finish it, but please spend no more than 2 hours on it, and send us wherever you are at that point in time. All right, so keeping on with some of the other questions coming in, as a friendly reminder, people who'd like, you can post your questions in Meetup job transitions in Slack. Caitlin asks, maybe Simone, you can kick us off here talking about culture interviews. Caitlin asks, what does a good culture interview look like, where you feel like you really understand the culture and aren't being evaluated on something overly simplistic? Like, do I want to go to happy hour with this person?
Yeah, that's a good question. I had a really good culture interview where I felt like I clicked with the people who were talking to me, and we talked about, they kind of started the conversation off with introducing themselves and then making it, kind of not asking too many, I don't know, it didn't seem like formalized where they had a list of questions and they just went through it. It seemed organic. So, maybe they started me off with one particular question, but then as the conversation went into one direction, they would then just go with it and ask more questions. And it was more about really personality and experiences and what we prefer and what we don't prefer in the workplace. So it was kind of focused on work, but also gave enough space to show my personality and make a joke, or just have some sort of social interaction as well.
Zach, have you had a culture interview you really liked?
Yeah, so one company, they brought in like a small panel of people. I think it was me plus 3 others, and the way the interview was structured was essentially a roundtable where each person would ask me a question, and then I would ask the group a question. And the questions didn't have to be about work. I pulled out my notebook to try to remember like what they asked me, because I know someone asked like, it was something like, what do you feel like you are especially knowledgeable about that isn't work related? Or do you have any like books or media that have like really impacted you that you would like to recommend and stuff like that. And it allows you to get that kind of conversation going. And as Simone said, like show your personality, crack a joke or something, and really kind of get to know everyone there.
Tim, what about you? Anything to add on the culture interview?
I feel like everyone else has given really great examples of great culture fit interviews. I think I just want to emphasize, like, interviews in general are a two-way street in which not just companies evaluating you, but also you evaluating the company. Culture fit interviews are doubly that case, because like that is the opportunity to find out what it's like working there, find out if this is a culture that you want to work with, whether it's inclusive, whether you whether it feel like you're going to be conforming to their culture, or whether you can express your identity and your experiences too. And definitely treat the culture interview as a very strong example of that two-way street during the interview process.
Yeah, spot on. Spot on. It always comes back to like you are interviewing the company as much as, and the team members as much as they are interviewing you. Along those similar veins, what are some of the flags that you've seen in interview processes, or maybe you only realize it after the fact? Let's go back through our panelists in the opposite direction. So Tim, Zach, and then Simone. You don't have to call any company out, but if there's anything that you'd highlight as maybe a theme or a specific flag that came up for you.
Pressure and urgency is something that has been massive red flags for me in interviews. It's like, I get it, companies are trying to grow and trying to hire people, either backfill or grow in some aspect. But creating that sense of disproportionate urgency and having people like basically having pressure set on, like, let's say you get an offer. I've been in situations where people told me you have 24 hours to accept it or it's gone. I was like, no, I need at least 2 business days and a weekend to figure this out. And those have been just massive red flags as of just like, if this is how they're going to treat you when they're theoretically putting their best foot forward and trying to impress you, I don't want to know what it's like actually being a part of that organization. Because especially if, like, since interview process is a 2 parts, or since interview and recruiting process encompasses multiple parts of organizations, such as HR, recruiting, and the actual teams that you're interviewing for, if you notice a sense of urgency and a sense of pressure the entirety of the interview process from multiple different people, that sounds more like a company culture thing and not just isolated to an individual team or an individual.
Yeah, so that urgency is really a symptom of other cultural concerns, and that's the flag that you're seeing.
Yeah, I'd say so.
Yeah. Zach, what about you?
I think I mentioned them before, but I think the thing that really gets me is just when I feel like I am experiencing like a very disorganized process where, and I think the theme I'm kind of catching on is like all of these are reflections of the company, right? If a process is disorganized, it could hint at that like maybe communication is not the best at this company, and they don't have a strong process in place for things like this, or it could be some other variables, but it is just like getting the impression of being part of a disorganized process doesn't feel good as an applicant. And then I know on the other side as a hiring manager, sometimes you're just like, did this happen? Did this person go through? Do we have more candidates in the pipe? And it's just very frustrating kind of being on the other side of that.
Simone, anything to add there?
Yes. So one thing that happened to me before is like I applied for a job. So the job description, I liked it. And then at the interview, I realized it was a different job I was being interviewed for. So that was really weird. I was so confused. And I said, is this the job? It sounds very different from what you're describing to what I applied for. And yeah, it was just, very odd. So I guess you want to interview for the correct job. What also happened to me, I really hate people being late. So I had an interview with somebody who was 10 minutes late. And they did tell me after like 5 minutes, oh, I'm so sorry, I'm going to be late. But I just thought, if you can't prioritize, interviewing me, then maybe you can't prioritize a one-to-one with me later. And I just had a really bad impression. And I said, I'm not going to do the interview. I just said, sorry, you're too late. And I just don't want to work in a company like that. And one other thing that happened to me in the past is that somebody got my name wrong. So I think they sent a job offer, but it wasn't my name on it. It was sent to me. And it was just like, you can't even get my name right. And maybe I don't want to work for you. So it's my red flags.
No, I've seen executives talk bad about other executives in the interview process, and that is always a flag. Like, take that one and run. That's got some cultural thing. I'm curious. Go ahead.
Sorry, on that vein of just like poorly worded, poorly framed, like deceptive job descriptions and applications. Like this is progressively becoming more and more of an issue, notably like working remotely. Like I remember my first job out of college, thought I had an office, thought I had people to work with, showed up on my first day, found out everyone on my team is technically across the country. And there were 2 other people who were working remotely, technically out of that office. So I was working remote within my first 2 months. And then I was previously at a company in which their postings were very deliberate about what the locations were. However, we knew from the get-go, like this was a remote job. However, that was not being communicated in the job posting. So like, especially in this growing remote work world, being able to get the truth and get the upfront facts about the job, the environment, whether it's remote or not, all of that early on is super essential.
Thanks, y'all. If maybe the community or attendees have flags that you've seen, one of the things I look back on my career is earlier on, I can now identify flags in the process that I didn't recognize then because I didn't know what to look for, or I didn't know that would be a flag. And now that I have more career experience, I can identify those things. I think it's almost like what we do in a lot of our data work. You're building like a gallery or a collection of experiences to pull on. And so it's really useful to hear the things that other people have seen as flags, or have seen go wrong, or have seen not realize they were flags, joined a company, and then realized how they manifested. So if you have something you'd be willing to share, please do share it in the Slack channel, Meetup Job Transitions. Or if you're not comfortable sharing it because you don't want it to be traced back to you, feel free to DM it to me, and I'm happy to share it in the Slack channel. And I will make sure that's done anonymously. All right, we've got a couple of other questions here. Alan asks, for remote technical interviews, which coding platform is used, and do you have preferences? Kelly did give some suggestions in the thread: HackerRank, CoderPad, CodeSubmit. I know Simone called out Jupyter Notebooks. Does anyone else have any that they would add?
Google Docs, man.
Google Docs. Tell us more.
Oh man, like, yeah, for stuff that isn't for SQL things, especially, I've gotten a lot of like, we're inviting you to this Google Doc, and here's kind of the setup and run through it. You don't need to write running code in the sense of just like, I'm not writing a program, but I am writing a couple of queries. And so a lot of SQL stuff I've seen has just been through just like a Google Doc.
Will adds Deep Note and Hex as example. I've also seen those. Alex says Woven was okay. So it sounds like there's not like a clear cut and dry platform. Companies are very much figuring it out. Tom, go ahead. Sorry. I thought somebody. Okay. Tom asks, what are good ways to have high impact in a new role? Where do you find threads to pull on? Zach, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, like I think the thing I always look for, and then when I kind of go into a new place, is I want to understand like the critical business flow. And when people talk about it, see where they like stutter, right? Like, oh, these are some of the weak points, and how can I reinforce this and concretely make someone's day or process better? I think a lot of starting a new role is just rapidly gathering context. And I think that's the advice I would give someone starting a new job. It's just like get as much context as fast as you can, and then you'll be able to start making an impact with your work.
Yeah, on like that vein, yeah, ask questions. Don't feel afraid to ask questions. Definitely don't try to conform into what you expect you should be doing or what you feel like others expect you to be doing on a new role. Because the greatest value that you provide in the beginning is that exterior perspective of your own experiences, and that you're a fresh pair of eyes in this organization that you just joined, and that you have you have a very fresh perspective when it's like outside, and you have your ideas like, okay, this can be refined, this can be tuned. So ask questions, but in addition to that, like building relationships, like that's such a huge thing. Figuring out early on your team, figuring out who they are as people, how to work with them, figuring out who your stakeholders are, like putting a name to a face, building those and fostering those relationships so that one, you feel more comfortable asking questions, and two, you start building that rapport and faith between the two of you.
Yeah, I definitely echo that as well. And with asking questions, I also like to try and do like a data analysis project where I just create some pretty charts that people the data shown in a way people might have not seen it before. So just to show that I can provide some insight quickly and yeah, on top of asking questions, just to show some fancy graphs. People always like that.
You will never have as much time to come up to speed and get context as you do in your first 90 days. So I love the advice of leaning into that. This might be the last question we have here, and it's actually from Will to hiring managers. So I'm going to tap our audience and pull Kelly and Scott to help answer this one. But Will asks, what's a flag on the candidate's end that you've seen and been wary of?
Something that I've seen come up in interviews where candidates are saying, I'll ask a question, tell me about a time you did this, what if this happened? And I hear a lot of, we did this, a lot of the we, and I'll try to dig into it and ask follow-up questions. And I'm like, well, what specifically did you do? And so, a lot of times what I uncover is that, they maybe kind of understood the project and had a small piece in it, but didn't really do the work. And depending on why I'm asking the question and the role I'm hiring for, that's really important for me to understand, like, what did that person do? So, I'd just be like, as a candidate, be transparent about what you did and watch your language there, because, hiring managers will pick up on that kind of language. I'll think for a minute if I can come up with anything else, but that's the first one that popped in my head.
Scott, what would you add to that?
100% agree. Like, you got to pick at that we. Whenever you hear we, you're like, ooh. I think the other thing is like, so now, in the Brooklyn data, where we've kind of grown in the hiring process, I tend to be at the very end of the process. And I kind of see my job to evaluate from a leveling perspective. People have done a great job of looking at the technical interview, we've done a panel interview, we've done a lot of different steps. And so what I'm always looking for is honestly really good communication skills. And it's It's whether you can communicate a project or goals, or literally, I mean, I have very little context of kind of the person's background, and see such a range of different folks that I'm really looking for folks that can explain complex ideas in a kind of a very straightforward way. I think that's just like, if you can't explain something, in kind of a way that can bring someone who isn't familiar with that topic up to speed, I think that's a flag to me.
The one thing I'll add from my own experience, having hired many candidates, is, like I've mentioned a couple of times now, I think of interviewing as a two-way street. So if you come to the interview and you have no questions for me, I'm the first stop in your process, you're not clear on what you want and you're not sure what you need to get out of me. So that's something I really care about. And if you've ever read High Output Management by Andy Grove, one thing he talks about is a lot of interviewers should, open up the interview with what questions do you have for me, about the job, or about the role. And I wouldn't, it doesn't make for a great candidate experience, but it's definitely something to keep in mind. Okay, cognizant of time here, I want to give our panelists a chance. Anything else about the hiring or interviewing process or starting a new job process that you want to leave us with as your final note? Let's do Zach, Simone, Tim.
Yeah, I think I would kind of continue on that thread as like a candidate, is like, know what you want. I think, like, when I apply for jobs, some of it is aspirational and some of it is just, I want to get this job. And so know what you want. One thing I found, I think last year, was this like job hunting matrix from Lara Hogan, which is just like, what do you need? What do you want? What are you okay with not having? And then another quadrant, oh, I think it's what you don't want, that I found helpful. And it can be stuff that's just like, I want more money, or like, I want more time. I don't care about being in an office. I don't care about a ping pong table. And then just, yeah, understand what you want, what size of company, etc. And then find your sources. I think the Slack community is a good place. LinkedIn, which is probably the Tinder of job applications, as Caitlin asked earlier, is not bad. Like, they have a decent algorithm that points you to okay things. And then Outerjoin I used for a while for like remote stuff. But yeah, I think it's know what you want and then find like a good funnel for new jobs.
Simone, what about you?
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Know what you want is super important. And also then be brave enough to ask all the questions to understand if that's what what this job is all about. Because sometimes, at least for me, I don't always feel confident enough to ask the questions. So it's like a learning process. And I've also found I'm quite uncomfortable with recruiters sometimes. I feel they've pressured me a lot in the past in terms of time. And then I didn't make the best decision. And I regretted maybe having started a job. And so I like to apply directly now. So I kind of cut that middleman out, which adds another layer of pressure because they don't work for the company. So they have a different interest in you taking that job than the company does. And also stand up for yourself if you feel like you're not being treated properly, like me with this. When I had to wait 10 minutes, then I think 10 minutes is a long time. If it's like a minute or two, that's kind of okay. But 10 minutes, I felt, a bit rejected. So, and then just say, this is it. I don't want to go through this. And be true to yourself.
Tim, any final thoughts?
Final thoughts can be probably summarized in put yourself first. I mean, applying is stressful, interviewing is stressful, prepping for interviews, doing all the jazz that people tell you to do in order to be a strong candidate, quote unquote, is really stressful and puts a lot on your brain and it really affects your life. Like, feel free to cut an interview process short if you feel like you don't want to work for them. Like, don't let yourself feel pressured or feel hard-armed, or don't jump at the first offer you get, no matter how relieved you feel, how glad you feel about it, or like you're just enthusiastic about the role. Like, go at your timeline go at your pace, do what works best for yourself. And like, also make sure that you're like, make sure that you're at a place emotionally, mentally, and like physically in terms of like where you're accepting the offer, like where you feel comfortable and you feel appreciated. It's like hiring managers like always need to hire more people. And however, like, how do I phrase this? Well, let's just drop that. But yeah, just put yourself first. I mean, always take care of yourself. Don't get swept up in the application process. Sometimes you just gotta cut out for a week or so after you put in those 50 to 75 to 100 applications, if you do. And that's fair game, because the point of you looking for a new job is hopefully that you'll find yourself in a better place than you currently are or was at.
Yeah, and I think we'll wrap up there. There are so many other things we could have talked about today, some of which were covered in the chat, like looking for diversity of interviewers and ensuring that company policies align with what you're looking for benefits and things like that. But I want to thank our panelists. So big round of applause. Woo! Thank you, Zach, Simone, and Tim for carving out some time with us. Thank you to our audience. We will keep the Slack channel open for a while. So if you have any follow-up questions, please feel free to post them. Like I said earlier, if you have questions where you don't want to put your name to them, maybe you're thinking about looking for a new job and you're nervous, feel free to DM me and I'm happy to share them on your behalf. And we will get this recording on YouTube. So thanks again, everyone. I really appreciate you sharing a little bit of your Wednesday with us. Thanks, folks.
Thank you.